Hi.
All right, so we are officially streaming live now.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, let's wait a minute or two until to see whether or not our group comes in. It's just now 4 o'clock, and hopefully that the dog won't bark too much in my background, and then we'll get going.
Sounds good.
How are you, Dick? It's good to see you. You're on mute.
On mute. You're still on mute.
Yeah, now that I'm a former representative from Portland, and I don't know what to do with all this free time. Ha ha ha.
I have no doubt we are going to fill it.
Right.
At least one person has some Christmas spirit there in the background.
Yeah, there's not many places in my house that does not, so this is the minimum spot.
Oh, hey, that's great.
Yeah, my house has turned Christmassy as well. All right, we're just going to wait another minute or two for the rest of us to come on, and hopefully they will, and whoever comes, and we'll get some work done.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Sounds good.
So let me just kind of run by what I was thinking about in this meeting. I thought we would break it off into Part C and Part B as well, and asked basically 3 questions. I'm really hoping that our public school folks show up. One is, did this phase 2 provide enough information? You know, we were waiting a lot for it. Hey, Kim. What else was missing and what else is needed? What do you think should happen next? And a message to the next committee. Is that about right, Hillary?
Sorry, give me 1 sec. I just had a request to resend the Zoom link, so I was
That's good.
copying and pasting that.
Fair enough.
But yes, I think that all sounds good. I can give a brief overview when we're ready to get started about what the next steps are officially in terms of the legislation and the contract. And then I think, you know, depending on how many people we end up with today, I'm not sure if we're going to end up with a quorum or not.
Sure.
We'll put some limitations on in terms of what I can draft on behalf of the advisory committee, but we can certainly, you know, have some discussions about general things.
Hillary, I have a question on the new, as the education committee turns over, have they assigned the new legislators yet, or is that still work in progress?
That has not happened yet.
Okay.
But cloture is the 18th. Is that correct?
That is correct.
We only need one more person with Erin here. And I'm assuming she's representing Department of Education. We only need one more person for a quorum. We need 6, correct?
Yeah, Roberta is coming as well. I just sent her the link. She didn't have the link. First
Perfect.
link, but I sent it to her.
All right, we'll still only need one person. There's Roberta. Because Roberta and Erin will count as one.
Exactly.
Well.
All right, let's start. So welcome. Welcome to the last meeting of the advisory committee before our work is done. What we're going to do today is Hillary, my name is Nancy Cronin. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Developmental Disabilities Council, and I am chair of this committee. We'll go around, have you briefly say your name, and then we're going to have Hillary Riesler, the legislative analyst and amazing woman who's been shepherding us all through this process. Tell us the next steps. And then I have a small agenda for us to follow in doing our work. So let's go around, and how we're going to do this is say your name and then count, and then introduce the next person who's going to speak. So call on the next person. So for instance, my name is Nancy Cronin. Crystal, will you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Crystal Arbor. I am the Child Care Services Program Manager at the Office of Child and Family Services. And I see Pete next.
Hi, my name is Pete Plummer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Woodford's Family Services, but I'm here today representing MAXB, the Maine Association of Community Support Providers, on behalf of contracted providers that work in the early childhood system.
And would you like
Kim?
Hi, I'm Kim Feeney. I represent Maine Speech Language Hearing Association, and I work as an SLP in the public schools and for CDS as a contractor with the 3 to 5. So I can cover all the areas of this transition thing. And I will call on Erin Frazier next.
Apologize about my camera. I'm having technical difficulties. I'm Erin Frazier. I'm the Special Services Director at the Department of Education, Birth to 20.
Hillary, will you go next?
Sure. I'm Hillary Risler. I am the legislative analyst for the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs, and I'm also staffing the advisory committee for this project.
Roberta.
Good afternoon. I'm Roberta Lucas, and I'm the Acting State Director of CDS and the 619 Coordinator.
Dick, will you please introduce yourself?
I'm Dick Farnsworth, and former legislator and former member of the Education Committee, but certainly deeply interested in this issue. Thank you.
We also have Sam Prowler, Prower, did I say that wrong? Another legislative aide, and we have IT here if we need it. So,
Yes.
Hillary, can I please ask you to talk to us about what the next step is in general, and then we're going to give the agenda for this meeting.
Sure. So you should have all received a copy of the final phase 2 report on late December 1st. Just as a refresher in terms of what the contract required, it was an implementation plan in accordance with the direction from the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs, with a focus on the following major components: a list of prioritized actions and recommendations, a finalized package of action items to be made in collaboration with Maine stakeholders, specific timeline of discrete activities, staffing, resources required, and major milestones, an internal and external communication plan, and any alternative paths in the plan with associated costs and benefits. And then they also requested a tabular matrix format regarding the implementation plan and the steps around, the elements around each step, as well as the entity responsible for each step. The Education Committee also specifically requested clarity regarding whether any particular action items required statutory change, administrative changes, or policy changes. The next steps in the contract and in the authorizing legislation at this point would be at some point a presentation of the phase 2 report to the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. The timeline of that is through mid-January. Obviously, there's a lot still up in the air right now in regards to what session will look like. But once the new Education Committee members are appointed and new chairs are appointed, we can start having conversations about whether they want and how they want to do any sort of presentation of this report for the next legislative committee. The Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs is also authorized to report out a bill regarding the content of these reports to the first regular session of the 130th legislature. And so should the next legislative committee choose to do so, there's no parameters on that bill. It could be quite small, it could be quite large. It would ultimately depend on that committee. When a legislative committee reports out a bill, it can usually happen in a couple different ways. One way is they report it out for the sole purpose of bringing it back to committee for a full public hearing and work session in the normal course of any bill. Alternately, a committee could hold hearings on a concept or a draft that hasn't been actually reported out yet. And at that time, they would report it out to the full legislature for the purpose of the whole legislature voting on it at that time. Those will be decisions, again, that are up to the next legislative committee and would be discussed in a public meeting about which way they would like to proceed. So that at this point, that is those official next steps for this project.
All right, so what our task is today is to draft whatever information we want to the next education committee about this report, and or about what we should do next, what our next steps are. And I've drafted 3 questions that I was hoping we would go through for each section, meaning Part C versus Part B 619. 1, did this provide enough information? You know, would a school district be able to take this and use it to transition, to implement? And if not, what else would have been necessary? What do you think that should happen, what the next legislative committee should do, what the next education committee should do? And then the last is, what is the message we want to send to the next committee about this topic? So I tend to always want to start with Part B, but I think I'm going to start with Part C definitely this time, and hope that some of our school folks come in. Do you believe this provided enough information for Part C to be able to implement? Was there any big questions that was still left unanswered?
Thank you. Yeah, Part C, those are the 0 to 3-year-old children, just to make sure everybody understands.
0 through 2, yep.
0 through 2, I'm sorry. Somebody told me, if you get confused, Part C stands for cribs and B for beds, and that's how I remember it anyway. So yeah, the Part C I thought was more on point than the Part B, but we'll get to that later. I thought it was pretty comprehensive. Right now, the state of Maine is really underperforming in Part C. You know, there's not a lot of that going on, and this created a plan for that to go in. And the fact that it's staying with DOE, I think is very meaningful. And I do like that part of Part C. So I don't have a ton of input. I focus more on Part B, but I wanted to add that, you know, the Part C stuff, I don't have a ton of comments, Nancy, to be honest with you.
Kim.
I tended to agree with Pete. I thought it was very comprehensive, and it really mapped out what next steps needed to be done for Part C. And the fact that, again, like it's going to be in DOE's hands. So I like that idea. I didn't have any concerns with it. I thought it was pretty straightforward. And like I said, I liked seeing the steps so that somebody could actually look at it and know what to do first, next, all the way down to last. So.
I did have one comment though, if I could go, Nancy, and if I could have my turn back, if that's okay. You know, some of the recommendations I looked at, the provider agency contract. So but by looking at it, it was pretty comprehensive, but it looks like a lot of the work would be done outside of the Department of Education within a contracted vendor relationship with a contract reporting to the Department of Education, actually. And, you know, and it could be, and I think it's broken out by region as defined, you know, so there could be multiple contracts or one contract. My only concern there, if it gets broken out regionally, would there be a level of consistency? You know, if there's 6 or 7 different individual contracts, I worry about that a bit. And I think I'm sure each contract hopefully would be the same and the deliverables would be the same, but those are the kind of questions and concerns that I would have if I was sitting in, you know, and I was responsible for the end product.
You know, for me, the devil's in the details. I think they did a
Yeah.
really good job. I am in favor of them moving forward with this. I would like the next committee to also play with the idea of an early childhood department, but now that I have talked and listened to a number of different people, I think it might be a difficult reach to get that done. And I think the more important part is something has to happen. You know, we are seriously underperforming in Part C. I think it has to be, we must get something passed next session that moves us forward in a forward direction. What I'm most concerned about is oversight of the new structure. We kind of have this issue now. How will Department of Education know what's going on with whether or not kids are getting what their needs met? How will we actually get the information flowing up to the top? But I don't think this is the level, that's rulemaking stuff. No, that's stuff that's going to come in the new legislation. But that's the stuff that's the details that I'm going to be wanting to look next. So in summary, I would like the next committee to consider another department. However, I wouldn't want this process to stop if that's not plausible. I would want them to go forward with this plan if that isn't where they want to go. I think something must happen. Roberta, Crystal, do you have any comments? Aaron?
I just want to say I share a concern with a reliance on contracted providers. I haven't been with the department long, but in my discussion with folks that have been here for a long time, that didn't go well for Part C, having lots of people to manage. So I think that what Part C work we would love to focus on would be expanding on what we already have in place and the expertise we have in place at the department or through Part C CDS right now.
And just a follow-up question for you, Aaron. This plan had almost a 3-tiered structure. First is the department, and then you have a CDS type RFP contract to be able to do the management of a lot of the day-to-day stuff. And then it would be providers underneath. Which level concerns you about the RFP? Is it all of it, or is it the third tier of having tons of providers out there, as opposed to the second tier, which is the kind of the administration of the project, of the work?
Yeah, it would be that third tier, you know, the management of contracted providers.
Thank you.
My only concern is that a lot of things are happening at the same time, such as making sure that legislation goes through for DOE being the lead agency, that main care billing happens at the same time, that training is already starting to happen. It seems like there's a lot of things happening in that very first year that are happening, and a lot of it requires legislative changes before anything can happen. And it seems like the legislative changes are the way that this report reads, legislative changes are happening at the same time. Changes are happening or expected to happen. So I'm a little concerned about the timeline that they outlined there.
I think that's really important, and I agree. And I think that needs to end up in our report as a certain statement, because it's going to be a waste of resources if we're all moving at the same pace and then all of a sudden the legislature decides they want to go in a different direction. Crystal, do you have any comments?
I share Roberta's concern. I think that, looking at like rulemaking processes and how that goes through and the barriers and how the timeline would be is
Yeah.
a lot happening at once, and even understanding, not knowing how the legislation is going to start out with the new year and what hiccups could happen with that. That would be, I think, addressing that, because I know more than ever that it can get skewed and you could be delayed a year out, especially due to COVID. So I think having that understanding and flexibility will have to be from the get-go of understanding that things could be delayed in this process due to that.
Okay, one more thing.
Of course, this is a conversation.
Yeah, one of the things, this is one report for Part C and Part B. And when there's legislation, I think there should be two sets of legislation, maybe one for Part C and one for Part B, because one could hold up the other based upon the path that they follow. So I would ask the legislative committee to consider that, and it might be more focused. I mean, you could set more focus on one age group than the other, and because it's a huge system, and I think it would be more efficient to highlight Part C needs than Part B needs separately, because there's so much in here. I was just kind of flicking through again, and child find is that's a whole world in and of itself, and if you got 6 or 7 different regions and they're all, it's would it be one RFP? Just the writing of the RFP is going to be an immense undertaking, and I don't, it is kind of compressed in a very quick time frame too. And are there resources set aside to hit that? I know they mentioned resources, but are the resources adequate, to do the amount of work? Because sometimes they were pulling from, well, people from CDS will go into DOE and they'll do all that work. Well, is that enough, to get all that work done in a short amount of time? Because the resources that CDS has now, God bless them, they need more. We all agree with that. But if you move them over, then more resources would be needed, I think, to make this a successful venture. I don't know what CDS or DOE thinks about that, but I feel that way. I've always felt that way, that CDS needed more funding.
Well, moving the funding aside, I most certainly think that having a Part C bill and a Part B 619 bill makes sense. As an outsider watching the last iteration of legislation, the arguments about Part C are different than the arguments about Part B. So sometimes the conversation got confusing about what we were talking about. Sometimes it clashed. They're different systems. So I completely agree that having treating this as two separate pieces of work is makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So what I'm hearing so far for the message to the next committee is we need to relook at that timeline to ensure that statutory changes that must have, it's almost, I want an order of statutory changes. What do they have to, Roberta, will you talk a little bit about this? You're not.
My only thought is that you also are incorporating DHHS, with main care. So you're really talking 2 agencies here, and legislation for both agencies, it should be incorporated into this timeline. And you're talking about changes in statute, you're talking about changes in rules. So there are a multifaceted variables that need to take place, and there is an order or a sequence that these have to happen.
Absolutely. So I'd almost wonder if the first step of this would be to order that. What would have to happen first, second, third, and maybe that even could be, what might be helpful is if when PCG comes to report on this, maybe they can talk about what would have to happen first, second, or third, or maybe Department of Education would come in and say, this is the order of things. I don't know how you want to hit the timeline, but this is what has to happen first. This will be second and third, because this is going to be a brand new education committee. They're not necessarily going to have the experience of our last education committee. I hope they do. I hope a number of representatives get on it. But having that information might make some sense.
You know, what else would be nice to have, if they're gonna, go to that next step, is, to kind of pile on a little bit to what was just said. Some of it's going to be DHHS, some of it's going to be DOE, some of it will fall under the Education Committee, but then some of it's going to fall under the Health and Human Services Committee too, if it's going to be DHHS involvement. And there has been a whole lot of, in here about, well, who's responsible for what? The Education Committee is responsible for blah, 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 and the Health and Human Services is responsible for a bunch of other stuff, so that it's the responsibilities are clearly delineated, for the roadmap.
I think we're running into one of those big issues, which is main care is under DHHS, but the truth is main care pays for things in Department of Education, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Labor. In some ways, it's an interesting thing. So, but I there might need to be some duplicate hearings at the same time. But I think would it be okay with you folks? I would like to make it loud and clear to the next committee that this work is a priority. I know there's going to be a million other priorities, but moving forward on the Part C system is a priority. Wherever you go, moving it to Department of Education or this pie in the sky dream that I kind of have, which is becoming more pie in the sky, but this is important work, and moving it forward is important.
Right. Now, just one more thing. I don't know who took,
moving to Part B.
when I was reading this and I said an RFP will be developed, I couldn't help but wonder, wow, that's going to be a really hard and complicated thing to write. I don't have any, I just felt that.
If they pass it, if they decide to go that direction, it will be a DOE's job. So, all right, let's move to Part B, which is the person, and why I'm really sad that we don't have more educators in the room. So Kim, I might lean on you a lot, and Roberta and Aaron. Do you think there was a lot of concern from the school districts about moving to SAUs because there was a lot of unanswered questions? Do you feel like this answered the questions? Things about transportation, funding, how to figure it out. What do you think?
Well, my first comment before I even get into that is the same issue around timelines and what happens first. And, before anything can be decided, legislation has to happen in order to meet the other recommendations. So it seems a little aggressive to have the timeline that they have in place where things are working simultaneously, and yet nothing has been set in statute or rule. So I think that even though I feel the anxiety around the districts, and I understand that, I think we need to think about what comes first. And it seems like we're putting the cart before the horse, that's all.
I agree. And and part of my motivation for asking that question is thinking ahead of what the public hearing is going to be like. And what the public hearing is going to be like is, I still don't understand X, Y, and Z. And so I'm just kind of thinking ahead about that a little bit. But you're absolutely right, Roberta. This has to be ordered. It has to be in a logical sequence. This is not an approved plan. This is a draft idea. So, Kim, what do you think the responses are? Would this report that was sent waylay fears? No. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I don't think that there were specifics enough in this to answer those questions by the school districts. I just don't. I think it leaves it up to, it feels like it leaves it up to other people. Again, so is it going to be the school districts that are going to have to figure all this out, or is it going to be the DOE that's going to have to figure all of this out? So yeah, that's what I got from it. Yeah.
I have to be honest, that's what I got from it too. I would almost suggest that I don't like kicking this can.
Mhm.
I just hate kicking this can. But I don't see how anybody's going to do this without Department of Education and school districts, with some parent groups. But really, school districts and Department of Education kind of digging into this a little bit and reporting out. This is a very rare time in which I say it's less parents. It is more the professionals for digging that stuff into what is possible. I'm a little saddened by not getting that deep information, but I think PCG was frustrated a little bit, or not frustrated. They weren't frustrated. They were very professional. It was a lot to ask for them to get to know us intimately at the lower level of investigation of towns and schools. Could they do it? Was it asking too much? But
Well,
yeah.
maybe for the amount of resources they had to reply to. One of the things that I thought they were asked, and I asked a little bit earlier, that you're right, this is just a draft recommendation. It's not, this is what you need to do. You know, they're not going to make that decision. That decision is going to be made, you know, at the legislative committee with input from the public hearing and all kinds of other things. But I thought one of the things that they asked for, you know, we want options. You know, is it going to go to the SAU? And if it is, at least here's the start of a blueprint of what that might look like. You know, there's other plans that could also work for the Part B population, and those, there's no summary implementation plan or bullet points or differences, or, you know, I didn't see any other implementation opportunities except you're going to the SAUs. And so if the legislative committee, if that's the only recommendation that they see, what does that mean? You know, I thought we asked them to give other recommendations. You know, I don't think it was 100% unanimous that everybody thought this was the path to go down. And so I think it's missing that, you know, in a big way, to be honest with you.
I think it's missing that as well. However, I'm concerned, you know, I just made a pretty public statement that I think Part C needs to move forward in some way. We can't rip this system in half with finances and just kind of leave this other area. This other area, something needs to be done with. And the answer might be, this is all such a catch-22. The answer might be to Education Committee, you have to vote. Legislators, you need to give us a direction and then we'll go there.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to say why. Okay, I'm sorry. There's no reason why Part C.
No, go ahead.
There's no reason why Part C can't go forward and Part B, you know, have more questions answered, or Part B go forward and Part C. That's why if there's two separate legislations, you know, one could be advanced and the other could be studied more, or look for other recommendations, or, you know, I have a couple other questions, but to me that was where, you know, I really, because I brought that up at the last meeting when I had an opportunity to speak. Are there other recommendations coming? And clearly there's a front runner, and I'm not saying that this is where we wouldn't end up. I'm just saying there's no choice. You know, it's like one person on the ticket, so you vote for that person. It's, you know, I just think that it would have been better to weigh pros and cons of a plan B.
Yeah, if I could do this all over again, I would have put a little bit more. I would have had a little bit more statements around writing the RFP, you know, around what the RFP looked like. But that's a would have, could have, should have kind of situation. We didn't know exactly what this looked like. But Roberta, what is the risks of, and Aaron, what is the risks of going forward with Part C and leaving Part B? You're talking about a system.
I'm trying very thoughtfully to think about that. I think I don't see them as, I feel like we have to act on both. That's how I feel. I think we have to move forward on both. And we are, you know, frankly, we're working all the time to improve services for students and children. But yeah, I actually, the Part B plan, it was aggressive, but I thought there was a lot of good steps in the process of how to get from A to Z. And I thought it was pretty interesting sequential process that was very clear to me. The only thing I found a little lacking was transportation, because it was like, figure that out, you know, so that wasn't as clear to me as the rest of it. So that was, and that's something that is the bane of every SAU out there, right? And CDS as well. Transportation is just, it's just a fantastic beast of a thing. But so yeah, I definitely think we should take action on both. I don't know, Roberta, if you agree.
I do, because both C and B fall under IDEA. So we don't want to separate out IDEA in our state. That just, it seems counterintuitive to me because of the, you know, the federal regulation.
Yeah, I think transition would become a nightmare if we did. That would be very hard. Just so you know, on the other side of this, I'm not sure exactly how much we're going to be able to do today. Hillary is investigating. We don't have a quorum, so we cannot take any action with any drafts. So I'm going to let Hillary keep going. I want to keep this conversation going a little while and for the debate, and I'll keep you posted as I hear from Hillary what our action truly can be right now. I think that from an advocate's point of view, doing nothing for the 0 to 5 system or the 3 to 4 system is a waste of money, a waste of time, and just continuing to ask a number of children. We're not doing anything good for CDS staff by keeping it in limbo, for SAUs from keeping it in limbo, or for children. So I really feel very strongly that decisions have to be made and we have to move forward, because this system has been languishing. So if it moved, so do you think that it shouldn't, Kim, you're ready to say something?
No, I wasn't.
Oh, okay. All right, well, what other pieces in here? I didn't think it was incredibly robust, the truly looking at how to manage the budget. I thought that people were going to be confused about that. I don't remember, but was there a comprehensive centralized intake system in this plan?
When you talk about intake, are you talking about Part C going to Part B, you know, as far as the children that are ready for services?
Yes, and the 3-year-olds. I think it's the doctors sending the 3-year-olds to the school system.
Yeah.
So, and that may happen at any given time. Did they decide when they would allow entry into it for a 3-year-old?
No, I didn't see that. What I saw was the SAUs were responsible for child find, you know, and so right now there's, I don't know, 7 CDS sites that are responsible for that. Now we're going to have I don't know how many SAUs we have, 100 SAUs responsible. I didn't see a central, and to me, that's you know, because there's child fine for the 0 to 2-year-olds and there's child fine for the 3 to 5-year-olds. You know, in our contracted schools, a lot of the kids that we get in the 3 to 5-year-old, many of them did not come from the Part C to us. They come from, well, they're 3, now they need help. Let's find help for them. There's no path there, and so, and that's with only 9 sites. So if you go to 50 to 100 or whatever, and that's the way I understand. Maybe I misunderstood what I read, but to me, the SAUs would be responsible for child fine. And is that the way you read it, or am I misinterpreting?
No, that's exactly what it would be.
Yeah,
However, when looking at budgeting and looking at the practicality of that, that might mean you have different kids coming in at any given time. So
Right.
when you are planning your budget for the year, I always thought that we really need iterative payments to school districts in a different way than the EPS system works. In order to be able to ensure that we're able to keep the doors open. My experience with school boards and town budgets is you plan for 1 or 2 extra kids, and then it shifts and changes as people move in and out of your district. But if you're talking about CDS, and would you have no idea, oh, I now have a child with extreme social needs that we didn't expect, and they're 3.5 and they were not identified. With autism now, that can blow a budget wide open very fast. So I think that's going to throw so I think they really should consider, I think that it was lacking the budgeting process for individual towns, the planning process. And the answer
maybe,
might be,
I mean, this report tries to get us all the way around the ballpark, always first, second, third, and home, you know, is what they tried to do here. And maybe we do it in steps, you know, break it down so it's more manageable. For example, instead of going to 100 SAUs right off the bat, there's a more modified plan to build up CDS, or maybe put it in DOE or whatever, you know, and strengthen that process instead of dividing it by 100. But that's a different implementation. That's what we don't see. That's what we can't choose from.
well, we can suggest whatever we can suggest if we have the authority. It goes into the phases that I heard before. Perhaps we had the early adopters, and then perhaps we have a phased in system that's a little different, or even how we've done our pre-K. Can you talk about, Roberta and Aaron, how has the process of pre-K adoption happened, and how might that inform this and our recommendations?
I'm not sure, first of all, how pre-K early adoption has happened in the past. And, you know, it's before my position in the DOE. Just so you know, though, there are over 250 SAUs in the state.
Okay, I was
that's
off.
Including communities, schools, and AOSs, and all that. So when we talk about early adopters, I know when I spoke to the early learning team, there was about 155 schools. Now that's not districts that do have pre-K in place, but because of COVID, some of those may not have opened their pre-K this year, or may limited seats in that pre-K. But I do know that there are around 150 schools around the state that have already pre-K in place. So that's, again, don't compare schools with districts, because they're, you know, that's a different, that's apples and oranges. So, but I don't know how the early adopters happened before I came on, and that's some of the work that I'm just starting to get involved with, and understanding it, and understanding preschool approval and all of that. So.
I was in a district that was an early adopter, and there was a monetary incentive for early adopters. That's
Oh.
what happened. There's grant money. And so they had a couple of different incentives where they were, incentivizing that collaboration for this just SAUs.
Do you folks have a sense about what the department thinks about this plan and idea, and how you folks would want to move it forward if they went and did it?
In terms of which part, Nancy? In
Part
terms
B 619. Moving into schools.
Oh, yeah, yes. Most of my life has been as a special education director or in special education as a teacher in a variety of places. And I can say that in the districts I've worked in that had pre-K, it was a lot more fluid. And I really appreciated that. I really liked having pre-K kids in my district. I got to know them, I got to work with them, and I knew the quality of services they were getting. I find it challenging being new to CDS, relying on a lot of private providers for pre-K services because of the some of the challenges we have with that. So I do support. As an educator, I support having pre-K students in SAUs. I think it's more fluid. It's I think it's always my preference. I know that if I talk to other special administrators or my colleagues in the field, they would agree. And then they would say, okay, just how would that happen? How would we be able to do that? We don't have the physical space to do that. We don't have personnel to do that. We don't have, so that was the barrier in the thinking, not that it wasn't the right thing to do for children.
Do you think this report gave people enough information to be able to move things forward if that is how the committee chooses to go?
I think it gives a lot of information, and I still have some, and I think it's very aggressive timeline. So that's the one piece about it that I feel is a little bit daunting, but I think it gives there's some very, very specific action items that I think are really, but it's, like I said, it's an aggressive timeline in terms of, making the transition, especially fiscally, and understanding that. And, those pieces, those fiscal pieces, the transportation pieces, some of those pieces are still elusive to me, but I thought there was a lot of good information in terms of breaking the steps down, for sure.
I think it's critical for us to, as a state, to look at how are we going to get inclusive programs for many, many children. There will be some children who need special purpose programs, and a small number, much smaller percentage. But inclusion's really important, and the least restrictive environment is really important. And I still get a little lost in how schools are going to be able to provide that if they don't have pre-Ks, because we will pay for the child with disability, but not necessarily the child without disability. We need to make sure that children without disability are with their peers.
Yeah, I think there is an over-reliance on more restrictive placements. Certainly this report indicated that. I think that it's very telling how many kids are in special purpose private schools in 619 in Part D CDS. Part B 619. And then how many remain there when they transition to kindergarten, which is, very, very few children. And that's very telling to me around what inclusive practice could be. I'm also very interested in equity across the state and experiences that are equitable, so that all students, all children have access to the same And right now, I don't think that is, I think it, we still have different services depending on where you are in the state.
Right.
And not essentially for special education, but for, for children.
I'd like to respond to that just for a little bit, Aaron, if you don't mind. I think one of the reasons why these kids, when they get to K through 2 or whatever, are be able to have a better inclusionary environment is because of the work that's done to get them ready for that spot. I know the kids that come in that are 3 and 4 year olds in our preschools are very needy. And by the time they get to 5 year olds, we do have an inclusionary classroom that they go to evolve into kindergarten. It's, I don't think the whole reason is that the special purpose private schools are not being as inclusionary enough. I mean, there probably could be more inclusion than there is, but I think that's clearly a funding issue, where the only money that they're paid is through MaineCare. There is no educational dollars flowing through. So it's the system needs to be revamped in many ways. And
I certainly totally appreciate the good work that all of our special purpose private schools are doing. I don't mean to diminish that at all.
no, I didn't think you did.
I definitely, I have a day treatment background myself. I am a huge fan of day treatment. I do think that because we are reliant on providers who may not have the expertise to deal with interfering behaviors, we could be in a position to over-rely on a more restrictive placement. Again, I haven't been here that long.
Mhm.
I've worked a lot to transition kids from special purpose private schools into public school. And the programming that we can offer in public school is sometimes very similar to what is occurring in a special purpose private school. That's been my experience, and I can only speak to that, but I certainly don't want to detract from the amazing work that you guys are doing. So just want to make that clear.
No, thank you. No,
And I will say, and I just want to say, Pete, as a mom, I a number of years ago, about 6 years ago, I had a child who had a disability, who would never have gone to a special purpose school, yet needed an inclusive preschool or needed an inclusive model. And he never, ever would have gone to a Woodford's. It wouldn't have been necessary. You wouldn't have taken him. It just would have been and I worry, and I think about those children too. There's such a huge number of children. My son, for instance, got speech therapy only externally and didn't get those opportunities to socialize with regular in a way that I think would have been very valuable. So I think when we're looking at inclusion and LRE, we have to remember there's a lot of kids who are just not accessing anything.
Yeah, and no, clearly, no, there's a role in for different types of providers, and I'm not trying to say that they all need to go to special purpose private schools, or not at all. But,
Right.
we believe in inclusion. We want inclusion for the kids. We promote that. We whatever works for them the best. If it's in a public school setup and system, we're not opposed to that. We want that for the children.
As I'm sitting here thinking, I would almost suggest that our next step, what our suggestion would be, is that the next committee consider saying yes to moving forward with figuring out the funding processes, all of those pieces about how to braid funding, manage the MaineCare, look at insurance, and creating that one-stop unified centralized billing system can move forward without knowing all the rest of the pieces. That's a chunk of work that I think is that can be moving forward. And at the same time, I think that whatever pieces that we need to look at regarding staging and timing of whatever we're going to do to 3 to 4-year-olds can be figured out. So I see you smiling, Roberta. What do you think of that?
I agree with you.
Cool. I think that's the next, I think that is a good chunk of work that we move, because I don't want to see us go, I don't want to see us doing nothing. So, so there were other pieces in here that could move forward. What else could move forward while we're filling in some of the gaps of what order do we move 3 to 4-year-olds? Main care building is one, but are there other pieces that can be moving forward no matter what is decided?
Sure. One thought is, Section 106 is kind of cruising along on the other side of the DHHS, and how that evolves, I think will have a lot of influence on the 3 to 5-year-old programs, be it special purpose schools or, itinerant schools that have people going to them, and that whole rate process. It didn't go too well the first time through, but if DOE and DHHS could work together and partner with contracted providers, I don't think there was true participation amongst the people providing the service to the people that are ruling and regulating the service. I think that would be a nice step to kind of establish rates that work.
I'm happy to say, and then I have another idea for a third branch of work that can happen kind of simultaneously, but Hillary is here. Hillary has some news.
So I just wanted to jump in terms of next steps for today, since we don't have a quorum. And what I think we can do is we really can't take any official action, but to the extent that everyone here generally has a consensus straw poll of what you would like to communicate, we can draft that and then send it around to the rest of the advisory committee, basically to get a thumbs up or a thumbs down. With the caveat, of course, that'll include that there was not a quorum here at this meeting. And also, as always, the caution against getting into substantive changes or anything over email. So it will really truly be a thumbs up, thumbs down for the rest of the advisory committee.
That's what happens when you don't come. Yeah, that happens. I think that's a good idea. My suggestion for Part B is you move into what are the stages, and relooking at the timeline for the moving to schools or what have you, work on the funded braiding. And then lastly, Pete, you've mentioned child find a number of times. That is a key piece.
Yeah.
And there are avenues about child find for 0 to 2 and 3 to 4. 0 to 5 you can do right away. I'm not sure the branding is as important as some of the communication with medical professionals, finding out where do you get information in, explaining what the services are. There are working with family organizations, rebrand, even if we don't change the names, even if we don't change the name of CDS, we still can do a rebranding effort in talking and communicating and working with our family organizations about why it's important to get into this, to get into CDS. I've been very frustrated. A number of years ago, there was a change in Section 28 in which CDS was bypassed a lot. And there were lots of I understood why, but I was very concerned because through the years, I've watched a lot of 5-year-olds move to kindergarten without IEP plans. And the consequence of serving only through main care prevented timely transition into kindergarten. So there are still some things that we can do right now to rebrand CDS with our family organizations and others. So I would say child find, centralized billing, while you work out the details for 3 to 4, and move on and move forward with part C. That's what I think we should put in this report. What do you think?
Well, when you talk about centralized billing, you know, I'm trying to think how that would be operationalized. You know, I don't know if private providers, contracted providers would be willing to put their revenue in the hands of a centralized billing service unless they were guaranteed by the central billing organization that they would be funded 100% because of what they bill MaineCare, because that's what's happening now. And I don't want to fall into have contract.
If I change the word to be, if I change my wording to be investigating braided funding systems.
Sure.
Crystal, I was seeing you kind of shaking your head. What's going on? What are you thinking? Tell me more.
Nope. I'm just taking it in. I think, you know, obviously the work between DHS and DOE and looking how the collaboration between those can greatly affect any movement. And so I think we're at a time where that's possible. So yeah, good thoughts here.
Yeah, working on those funded braiding funding, and hopefully insurance. I've never quite understood why we haven't maximized insurance, other than the fact that it's a pain in the buttuckus. It's hard, but there's options there. So can I get a thumbs up that those are the 4 branches that we're suggesting moving forward on? Move forward on part C with the recommendations. Move forward on efforts to improve child find. You know, there are things that can happen today. I'm not even convinced you need a lot of legislation about it. Just a lot of coordination. Move forward on funding, braiding funding and those efforts, and discuss centralized billing. You know, dig into that a little bit more, and then dig into and rephrase the timeline moving part B 619 forward in a more practical way, in which the legislators can make decisions.
Can I add one more foot to your stool? I'd like to. Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add one more foot to the stool for discussion purposes. And if the group doesn't want to go down, I'm fine. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. Should we investigate a plan B? You know, another type of plan that might work, and not put 100% of the eggs in the SAU basket. I know there's a role that needs to grow, but to look at, is there an opportunity for a beefed up CDS that's properly funded and has, you know, a board in each region which has SAU representation, just a kind of a step towards SAUs being totally responsible, but centralizing them in mass so that there's efficiency opportunities in various parts of the state anyway that don't have huge SAU school systems that have maybe the ability to do some of these things. You know, I worry about, you know, that and can we look at another structure deeper than we have, you know, in this first round here. And
Kim, I don't want to use up all the airwave. Lord knows I can.
I think that if we try to come up with a plan B kind of thing, it's going to be, the message I think is going to be confusing to the education committee. I know just from my constituents and working in the 2 school districts that I work in, they have been waiting for this, but wanting a plan kind of thing. And so I just come in with knowing that this is kind of the way that they want to go right now. I don't know that a plan B is going to be something that anybody is really going to want to try to dig into and stuff. I don't know. This is what, their 4th time of trying to do this, or 3rd or 4th time of trying to do this through the state. And I know I've heard from people that dealt with the other 3 times or whatever, and they're just like, come on, let's just get it done. Let's do this. That's what I've experienced. So.
But they did that while cutting funding to make those other plans work. They talked about it, but I've watched the funding in CDS get cut and cut and cut, and boards go away. And of course, there's not going to be improvements if you go down that road. So if you go to the SAUs, there's clearly going to need to be more funding. No matter which road you go down, Kim, you're going to need more funding. And I don't think the system failed because it was a faulty system. I remember years and years ago, it was a great system until all the cuts started coming, if you go back 10, 15 years. But I understand what you're saying too. The SAUs, these 3 to 5 year olds, that's where they're going to be. That's where they're going to end up. And if they know them, I'm not opposed to that either. I thought they were looking for options, and if we decide as a group, one person, that's fine. I'm okay.
I think the last education committee was looking for options, and I don't think we wrote the RFP in such a way in which PCG did it. And then I think we gave PCG different notices, and it was too late. It was done.
Yeah.
As an I think it's going to be difficult to say to the next education committee in the middle of a COVID economic period of challenging time that we need tons more funding to ramp something up that we've been trying to do for a very long time. At the same time that PCG is going to be in front of them saying, no, there's plenty of money in the system, you're just not using it wisely enough. I think next legislative body should really consider moving through how do we maximize funding streams before we immediately say we need lots more money. I have heard that we are extremely expensive. I think we need to go through the funding braiding significantly. As far as the plan B, if you had talked to me 2 years ago, I probably would have been with you on it. Just as an advocate and as a mom, I've just watched these children not get anything year after year after year as we keep talking. So I guess I'm a little impatient. Others might not be, and that's a personal statement.
No, I get it. I get what you said, what you're saying, and I believe the biggest reason why, and it's not just services are not getting at special purpose preschools, it's speech pathology services in Aroostook County, it's OT services in Knox County, it's itinerant services throughout the state where CDS can't hire people. It's systematic everywhere, and if you take all of that and you put it into the SAU system, I'm sure that will be successful. But to say that there's enough money in the system, we don't need to put any more, we just need to shuffle it around and the schools will be fine, I think is very misleading to the schools. I mean, seed money isn't even counted correctly in this report. If you want to get into, if I was a town administrator and you said, we're just going to shuffle the money around and you're not going to get any more money than what's in there, and you have all these kids, I would be worried. We're very worried, to be honest with you.
No, you're right. You have a very good point. That we do need to look at seed money and how that's going to work. It is going to cost more for SAUs, and I don't have all those answers. And I am but I do think we should maximize what is these different funding methods look like. You're
absolutely,
also
sure.
right, in my opinion, at the workforce shortage. And I think that this report seriously overestimates regional capacity in childcare and Head Starts and preschools. It is a serious overestimation of what the truth is. So you're right as well. But I think somehow that's the stuff in this legislative education bucket that I want them to move to talk a little bit more about on how to move and what the staging is. And I also, just for the record, will be always on the standing up in front of the legislative committee saying children with severe autism or intellectual disability need special purpose programs, or very clear, they need programs in which they're able to get intensive services according to medical need. So you should hear that as well. It's just.
No, I get that. I feel there's a role and a place. I don't think that's going away, and that's not
It's not going away.
my thought. No, that's not the fear of the contract providers that I work with. You know, they're unknown. There is this out there though. You know, we have waiting lists of kids that we do not invest in facilities because this is going on. You know, because we can't get into a long-term lease and revamp space. We don't get facility dollars. You know, we have to do that with the treatment dollars that we get. So while this is going on, it's stagnant, you know, as far as growth, you know, in the work that's done, whether it goes down this road or plan B or whatever, there needs to be a path so that the work can happen and the kids can get served. Right now, things are on, I don't know if they're on hold, but it has a chilling impact on services.
So to sort of bring this back around to sort of what you actually want to communicate to the education committee.
Sure, thank you, Hillary.
I think we have the 4 branches. I'd like to ask for a thumbs up. I'd like to see if we're in agreement in saying that we would recommend them moving forward with Part C and having legislation about that. That we would like to encourage them to take action around braiding funds and maximizing funds. There's a lot of concrete things in there that I think would be wonderful. To encourage the re-look of Child Find and really talk about the critical importance of this developmental service, these services. And then lastly, to encourage the next committee to re-look at the timeline of how to get things done and the details, to work with SAUs and service providers and the Department of Education and have a family representative to really look at how to do this in a logical timeline that would work, as opposed to putting everything kind of simultaneously while not destroying the existing CDS staff. Are we in agreement of that? Can I have a, let's just look for a thumbs up, a thumbs down for those. Crystal? That's all right. I think that will provide at least direction. And I think, are we in agreement in the statement that movement needs to happen? That we can't just go to the next committee. We really encourage the education committee not to put us in a stasis, not to do nothing, but to move us forward in some way.
Yeah, no.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
It's not working,
I think
no.
we all might end up, we might be at a public hearing having disagreements personally about nuance, but those are broad strokes that are important. Is there anything else?
Oh,
Yes, I would like to chime in.
Please.
And thank you very much for the work that you've done, the time that you've spent taking a look at this issue. And needless to say, when the hearings come, I will be there. But it really is important that we get the best knowledge of a whole bunch of folks put together so that we can make this thing work. And I agree with you, Nancy, this has to happen. We cannot fool around with this anymore. Thank you very much.
All right.
So what I'm going to do is put this all together. Unfortunately, I did miss some of the conversation during the meeting today while I was dealing with the other issues. So it's going to take a little bit of time for me to go back and re-listen and make sure I catch all those important pieces and put it together. And obviously, we don't actually currently have a joint standing committee on education and cultural affairs. So we do have a little bit of time to put this together. So over the next week or so, I'll put a draft together and make sure everyone here has a chance to see it, send it out to the broader advisory committee. And then once we do have the new joint standing committee on education and cultural affairs, I'll be sending this memo to them, as well as all the rest of the reports and documents that have been submitted as part of this project over the last year, and begin planning for the next session.
Thank you, Hillary, and thank you,
Thank you.
everybody. If I'll give you one more opportunity, is there anything else to say? If not, then we close this and thank you very much. You'll be getting an email.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, however you celebrate. Bye.
Thank you.